I think the social media strand is interesting. That's also one that we can study, actually. It is, and you'd be probably the best person suited in the world to do it, perhaps, given your scholarship already, is you probably know which Americans are using social media and which ones aren't. And my hypothesis is that you probably do see a greater dechurching effect in those who are regular social media users versus those who aren't. And I just think that'd be such a fascinating question to actually answer. And suppose that hypothesis is right. Do you have any basis to believe it is or isn't?
Yeah, I mean, none of our research would cover that anecdotally. I think because we know from research that social media has an isolating effect, it would make a natural sense that it would affect dechurching. I will say that one of our most unpopular opinions here at this church, I've written on it in the book, The Great Dechurching, and elsewhere, is that we are pro-technology. We use technology in many ways, but we have stopped live streaming. Because we don't, what God has given us in terms of embodied worship, we don't want anybody to have the impression that what they're doing when they sit on the couch and watch a sermon and music is in any way the gathering that the Bible tells us not to neglect. It does not take the place of the fellowship, the singing, the prayers, the sacraments. So as a point of, this is what we are here to do. We are here to worship in an embodied way, to be known and to know each other. We have cut our live streaming, and we will, our plan is to never launch or reinvest in that again. And honestly, after we did that, we saw a pretty good uptick in people coming to church.
Yep, absolutely. It's like return to work. There's a certain there's a return to the office culture, and there's a real parallel there from the world of business to the world of church. I will say that if the hypothesis is right that more people on social media or active users of social media are disproportionately represented in the dechurchers versus those who haven't dechurched, as you put it, leaving church, it raises the question of what vacuum in your heart that sort of social media usage is actually filling, right? And I know that the argument for any person of faith to believe in God is not a utilitarian one. It is one that is grounded in truth. And I think it could be denigrating to somebody to say, well, the reason to believe in God is that it's good for you. But acknowledging that there's many different people of different faiths who might be listening to this, I think that there is regardless of your basis of faith, I think that most people of faith would agree that it does happen to be also good for you in order to believe in God. And when you stop believing in God, I think there is an innate human impulse wired in us as fallen human beings to believe in something, right? You and I spoke about this previously in the rise of the modern climate religion. I believe it's no coincidence that you see increased climate fanaticism. You talked about the 1990s as a turning point. Well, I think that is a new substitute for religion that may have come from the early 1990s. And so I do think that there's some of that innate hardwiring, and it may be that social media is not only a cause of potentially the dechurching, but has a substitution effect for at least the void it fills in your heart, in the way that an addictive drug might make you think that you don't need, to pursue happiness in the ways that real pursuits of happiness would give you, rather than the way an addictive drug would. So I might say the same of climate ideology to the number of likes you get on a social media post.
Well, I agree with what you're saying. Let me back up just a little bit and affirm, there's been some fascinating research in terms of physical and mental well-being and attending houses of worship, services in houses of worship. In our study, we polled those who had dechurched, and the levels of anxiety, depression, loneliness, and suicidal ideation were off the charts. You can, again, read about it in the book, but it was off the charts. We cite a Harvard study. Tyler, what was his name? Tyler, I'll think of his name later, but he was at Harvard. They did a big Harvard study. And actually, this, Harvard's not a bastion of Christian thought, and they came to the conclusion that physicians would do well to consider religious services as a form of healing for people, because they can't deny the data. It's good for people. Now, going forward to the second part of your question, Martin Luther said, "Our hearts are idol factories." We are constantly looking for some place to find purpose and find meaning And I would argue that this is, I appreciate you using the term fallen nature. It's a part of our fallen nature. We've been separated from God. We're looking to be reunited. And, from my perspective, Jesus Christ, because he died on the cross as a payment for our sin. So he took our sin, but then he gave us his righteousness. That is the only way that we're going to find the purpose and the meaning that we're looking for. But even as Christians, we're susceptible to finding new places for meaning, to falling off. Martin Luther also said, you jump back onto the horse and you fall off the other side. So we're all prone to find meaning and purpose in places that are ultimately not going to fulfill us. And the more it doesn't fulfill us, the more we're going to go down that path looking for it even more significantly. So I think that's what you find it in politics, you find it in academia, you find it in sports, you find it in health, you find it in every facet of life that a person can possibly look to find purpose and meaning. When obviously, from my perspective, I have a strong view that it comes from Jesus and Jesus alone.